Welcome to TriloTalk. This is a podcast dedicated to topics that we think are important to the profession of medical writing. And our goal is to bring these topical issues and ideas to the forefront and spark conversations in the medical writing community.
Hi everyone, welcome back to TriloTalk. I'm Lisa Chamberlain James, Senior Partner at Trilogy. And for this episode, I'm joined by Sudipta Chakraborty. Sudipta is Associate Director and Head of the Health Literacy and Plain Language Centre of Excellence at Biogen. We're going to chat today about two of my favourite things, artificial intelligence and plain language. So we're going to talk about how we can use artificial intelligence in the creation of lay summaries of clinical trial results, which is something that Sudipta with a multifunctional team has just published what I consider to be a seminal article about. So Sudipta, welcome to TriloTalk.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here.
We're delighted to have you here. The article that you wrote was originally drafted using AI, which I thought was fantastic. How did that go? Give us the insider information. How did it go? Was there a lot of cleanup to be done by human experts? Did it save time, or was it actually a bit of a nightmare and you had a load more time to edit it?
Well, it was kind of honestly a mixed experience. All of the members of the working group, maybe to give a little bit of context, came together because we were starting to see the use of AI with lay summaries, and there was a pretty egregious use of it back in 2023, where there were summaries made based on data available online, and it was clear that there was no human involvement because there was a lot of inaccuracies and just general inconsistent messaging from what a sponsor would post rather than what this AI exercise did. And so really, there are a lot of people in the working group, myself included, that are a part of the group initially that didn't really have AI experience. And to be perfectly honest, I didn't trust it yet. I feel like I sound like, my mom when she's learning new things on the iPhone. But I really did feel that way. I just wasn't really sure what to make of it at that point. There are, of course, a lot of people that thought, oh, is it taking over everything we're doing? Are we not going to have jobs anymore? And just not really knowing how it was going to work. And so I think the really cool thing about our working group is it had such a variety of perspectives that in terms of using AI to write the summary, I think it was like a really important exercise for all of us. I wasn't involved in that part of the group, but we did have different members of the group use AI just without any type of guidance or, however they were using it before to draft certain parts of the paper. And so because there were multiple people probably using different styles of prompting, different types of prompts, there wasn't a lot of consistency. When it all just came together for that very first draft, it was a mess. It was definitely messy.
Yeah.
But in doing so, we learned, a lot more about what limitations are, coming into it honestly kind of blind for me. Learning what it can do and what it can't do was really valuable in that exercise. But because it was done by so many different people in the group in different ways, and there wasn't a standard, which is exactly what these guidelines are hoping to do, there was a lot of cleanup. There was a lot that had to happen with all of us kind of looking at it from not just an accuracy standpoint, but really the bigger one was tone.
Right.
I'm sure, Lisa, you've written a ton of papers, and you know that if it's like a group project, a high school group project, right? And everybody comes together, everyone's got their own style of writing. Even if you're following style guides or, what have you in medical writing, everyone just has a slightly different way of writing. So even if you add that in with also AI coming in as another party, there was definitely an initial need to go through and realize, the tone keeps changing. And actually, because there was so much of an initial, I think, distrust, there was a lot of kind of negative language towards AI in there. And I thought that was interesting because when AI was used, obviously that wasn't there.
Yeah.
And so having to have those all come together, yes, there was a lot of cleanup, but it actually was a very interesting experiment to do.
It sounds fascinating. I love the idea. Well, it's not an idea, it's kind of an acknowledgement that even AI tools have a voice,
Yes.
and
Yes.
I don't know why we should be surprised by that, but we are. Me too. And I've had the same experience when I've used AI to say draft, the first draft of parts of a manuscript, for example. I found that I got the best results when I gave it examples of my own writing and said,
Right.
I want you to write like me. And actually,
Yes.
when you
Yeah.
do that, it did a really, really good job. I could,
Right.
it wrote in my voice. But I guess it would be no different from if we had several people parallel authoring parts of a dossier or a manuscript. You would, as you've just said, you would have to merge so that there was one voice going through all of that so that it sounds like it's been authored by one person.
Right.
But
Right.
I think we just expect more from AI. We don't expect those kinds of problems, which is probably unreasonable, but it's a human expectation.
Right.
So I have to ask you, Sudipta, after all of this, did it change? You admit you had preconceptions when you came into this. Even after the first draft, did it change your preconceptions of using AI, or were you still a bit on the fence?
I think I was still a bit on the fence, to be honest. I don't think it was until we all really, as humans in the working group, came together and really kind of mapped out like truly what the scope of the guidelines were going to be, and kind of comparing that to what this kind of initial draft came from AI, and kind of having, honestly, if we take AI making the draft out of the question, even just having all of the different people, we had AI experts that joined the team. We had medical writers, we had nonprofit representation, we had academia representation. And so there's so many different parts of our world, right, that do things a little different. And I think after coming together and having those discussions, sometimes having disagreements, bringing in our own experiences, our own fears, as I did, of just not really knowing how much I could trust what was being given to me. I think by the end of the entire endeavor, I had changed kind of how I felt. But even after that initial one, and I may have been in the minority, but even after the initial one, I was a little bit still unsure about it.
I would say that was you critically thinking about it, and I think that's one of the best attributes that humans bring to this. So I think that sounds very sensible, if you ask me. A little bit of cynicism and a little bit of critical thinking, I think, is necessary with all of these wild
Right.
claims. So yeah. So
Exactly.
in terms of lay summary creation, because that's what the article was focusing on, and a big use case for AI at the moment. What challenges do you think that we're still facing? And do you think AI can solve or help any of these?
Yes. So I think the biggest thing for AI, right, that I mean, not just in lay summaries, medical writing, the pharma space, for anything really that it's being touted for is scalability. Being able to, pump out as much as we can, as quickly as we can, making some of those kind of initial steps of the process a little bit more seamless, a little bit more maybe painless, less tedious on humans. I know we don't cover this specifically in the guidelines. It may be something we cover in the future as a working group, but one of the things I know that even our organization, other organizations have thought about is the urgency that's often needed with the protocol lay summaries with the EUCTR, right? These are often very, very short documents. There's a big ask of what has to go into a two to 3 page document, and a lot of times you're turning things around very quickly. Or even something like an RFI comes in that has something related to the synopsis, and you need to kind of address that as fast as you can. That type of scenario, I think, is where AI really is going to come in. Has it solved it yet? No. I mean, I think we're just still way, way too early in the process. And I think from a scalability standpoint to AI, yes, is it really easy? I admit I've used it for this, right? Taking jargony stuff and just turning it into plain language. It's really fast and really good at that. But there are a lot of things that still are, I think, human involvement touch points that have to happen before we can seamlessly say that it has made everything better for us. And a lot of that is just, I'll give you an example from our organization. The new Center of Excellence that I head up has a goal of trying to make multiple functions kind of come together in our messaging. So, not just a lay summary of trial results, but what about the ICF that person read before they joined the trial? Any study websites, study brochures that are a part of the recruitment retention strategies. I think there's still kind of a big disconnect that happens with what sponsors put out to either trial participants or just into the general domain. And I think while Lay Summaries started that kind of initiative, I can't believe it's been a decade ago, that was the first push about being transparent to participants in the public about the results in a way they could understand. But now there's a bigger push to make all of that more consistent throughout. And I think with AI, there's definitely a good use there, but we're just not there yet. We don't have enough evidence. We don't have enough use cases out there of what that could look like. But I think really scalability is a big one for AI and lay summaries.
Yeah, and I think what you just said is a really important message. It's if all you have is a hammer, every problem looks like a nail. And I
Right.
think, there's been a lot of crazy claims made about
Mm-hmm.
AI. AI is going to be able to do everything from make us a cup of tea to deliver Brad Pitt to my doorstep. It still hasn't done that. I'm still angry about that. So, there are a lot of really silly claims out there. And I think a lot of people thought this was just going to be come in, be really easy to use and would solve all of our problems. And actually, life isn't like that. Nothing is like that. It was an unrealistic expectation that I think we all had. And so now I think we're really in the trough of disillusionment, right? We're all kind of like, oh, actually, it's not doing what we thought we would. It's a little bit clunky. It needs a lot of work. Some bits are fantastic. It's not
Right.
all bad news. And it certainly is the future. It's the way ahead. But I think a bit of a realistic attitude needs to happen, and a bit of, let's find the right use cases. It's not one size fits all. And
Right.
certainly, there are some tools that are great at plain language. There are some that are not so great. So I think, what you said about having the human in the loop is so important, because that's where, especially in plain language, there's nuance, there's emotional intelligence that needs
Right.
to be layered on top of that. So whilst AI can give you a really great first draft, perhaps, it shouldn't be the only draft. It shouldn't be
Exactly.
AI straight to final draft. You have to have a human. And I know your article speaks to that quite a lot, which I was delighted to see, because I really fervently believe that, that there needs to be a layer of human contextualization and an EQ layer on top of whatever
Right.
comes out of AI, for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So in terms of sponsors using AI in this, let's talk about the use case of lay summaries. What do you think is the learning curve for them? I've spoken about the trough of disillusionment, but what do you think?
um, I think the learning curve is maybe the same, if not maybe a little bit larger for AI as really any type of new process implementation, right? If you think about it from, I'll talk from a sponsor's perspective. As much as I want to move mountains like that, which is my current endeavor with this Center of Excellence, it is often a slow process. There can be a lot of red tape. There can be a lot of people are usually resistant to change. So no matter what you're changing, if we aren't even talking about AI, I'm talking about a completely different new process for a company for consistency and standardization, that in itself has a big learning curve. And so when you're throwing AI into it, as you said, it can't be done carelessly. And I think that's so far, the evidence that we saw a couple of years ago was that it was done a bit, here we go, we're just showing you what we can produce via AI with that kind of, oh, there's no hand holding needed, that wishful thinking of like, I just stick this in, it spits me something out, we're good to go. And so because of that, there's a lot that has to happen from a training standpoint, creating resourcing that actually can do this. I am not like an AI data scientist any type of person like that. I am a writer. And so me, myself trying to learn, okay, what is a good prompt? How can I make sure that this prompt not only has no bias in it, but it also is consistent maybe with something else that I'm producing using AI. And so, yeah, I mean, the curve I think is similar for anything new that you're trying to implement. I do think it's a little bit more because there are a lot more nuances involved with AI that I think people are just now starting to think about.
Yeah, change management, I think, has been woefully neglected in all of this. And we're
Right.
seeing that in surveys we're doing in the medical writing community. There's still a lot of fear, a lot of apprehension, a lot of resistance in some areas for good reason. And I think that a lot of companies haven't considered the change management aspect. They've focused on the tech aspect, but they've actually neglected the human. So I think that's something that we're probably going to see more and more of as we move forwards with this.
Right.
You mentioned bias, which I think is another really important factor to consider. And we hear a lot about, there's the one-click CSR now, and God forbid, moving towards the
Right.
one-click dossier. So accuracy and bias are very, very hot topics, especially in our area. I mean, we're talking regulatory healthcare. Accuracy is number one, top of list of our priorities. So when it comes to using AI in lay summary generation, how can we ensure that they stay accurate and as well as being patient friendly?
Right. So you mentioned, promotional tone, right? It's been, even with lay summaries being around for a decade, I think there are still organizations that are struggling with not having that language in their documents. Things like, I know you're very familiar with this, Lisa, but, not having words like better than or promising or a benefit of, when we can't really say that in something like a lay summary that is being based off of a single clinical trials results. So, the example I gave earlier from 2023, the kind of more widespread pilot that was done out there, there were a lot of issues with accuracy because basically it was just fed a data set, just fed like a table of numbers, and based on those table of numbers, AI came up with its own conclusion. And those conclusions were not what matched oftentimes with what a sponsor would have concluded based on stats, based on a lot of other factors. And that was a major issue, to have incorrect kind of false claims out there based on data points.
Yeah.
And then in terms of patient friendliness, I think it's still a push for some organizations, which does surprise me. I know you and I are very well aligned in the world of, patient voice and making sure we have that kind of thought into everything we write. But there still are groups out there who don't necessarily think it's a requirement to have some kind of patient advisory board review your documents or having patients involved in the creation of these documents in some capacity. And so if you're already not doing that, we can't expect AI to step in the role of some kind of, editorial panel full of healthy volunteers, general public members, healthcare professionals, et cetera. The AI agent can't be that group all in one. And I think one of the ways that we still ensure that level of patient friendliness is to still have these groups take a look at the articles, at the summaries.
Yeah.
And that's just not like a thing that I think AI would be useful for in this moment in time.
I agree. I mean, possibly in the future, we're hearing a lot about AI personality modeling and
Right.
avatar modeling, and it sounds very futuristic, and I'm sure it will come to pass eventually. But right now, we're not there. Certainly, nothing that I've seen is there right now. Although there's a lot of work going on in that area, which is really interesting. Brings us back to the whole conversation about bias and what are those personalities going to be trained on, and how would you train. I mean, I guess you could have different personalities, which is great, but how would you train them? Who do you model them on? And the human race is a wonderful melding pot of a gazillion different types of attitudes, opinions, personalities. So it's hard to see how that would work, but I'm fascinated to see how we can make it work. That would be fantastic to have some kind of of review.
Yeah.
But what you
Agreed.
mentioned prompting, and at the moment we are still in the realms of, for most tools, having to write some kind of prompt. We're moving more towards natural language generation, but there's still some level of prompting at some area behind the scenes, if not at the user interface. So is there significant training for research sponsors to make sure their prompts don't promote bias in this context or in the output?
Oh, I mean, absolutely, right? We have to have some level of expectation that there's going to be specific governance that has to be there around AI prompting that allows it to be standard, right? It's
Yeah.
eventually at our organization already, there's some level of AI training that's happening. I'm sure it's going to pick up in speed. And one of those aspects will be specifically around prompts. I know there are a lot of groups out there, Transeller at DIA, that are looking at, templates that can be used for checking prompts and making sure that we're responsibly using prompts in a way. I know some groups have started prompt libraries. So, making sure that there are libraries of prompts that allow us to stay consistent and we're not getting those multiple personalities popping into what we're doing and giving us slightly different things every single time. And I think that is, in the works as we speak for most companies. And if it's not there, it has to, because people will run into that issue of bias if there isn't some kind of either governance or training, resourcing around figuring out, how do we put language out there that isn't skewed in any way, isn't misleading. It doesn't have language that is exclusionary. Doesn't
Right.
have those like terms that we talked about,
Yeah.
better than or promising. And a lot of that also kind of interweaves with tone too.
Yeah.
One of the things I always think about, and I used to think about this pre any kind of talk about AI, is, for example, in some kind of rare disease trial or an oncology trial, and how we're talking about some of these endpoints that are so sensitive, right, to the people reading the summaries. Like, let me think, oncology. Progression-free survival or
Mhm.
some kind of objective response, and you're trying to
Yeah.
talk about like, well, how long did these participants live before they died?
Yeah.
And that type of kind of messaging in this point in time with AI, we just have to be really careful with that type of sensitivity. There are cultural sensitivities too, and we think about this as humans, but we have to make sure that the AI that we're training has the right training to consider all of those factors.
For sure. And we're back to the whole emotional intelligence side of things, aren't we? Computers can be brutally blunt
Yes.
in that's the kindest way I can put it. But you and
Right.
I have both seen horrific outputs in that kind of scenario. And when
Right.
it's patient facing, it's even more important to have those sensitivities in the back of your mind. So yeah, I
Right.
totally agree with you. But prompt libraries, I've heard this in some of our clients as well, and it makes complete sense. I mean, some of these prompts can be 5, 6, 10 pages long. You
Right.
don't want to be writing that from scratch every time. So that it makes complete sense. But I'm old enough to remember the Boolean terms for Google, so I'm holding on to the natural language is going to come for AI as well. I know it's almost there, so I'm hoping the days of prompting, at least on the user interface side, are not going to be gone in the too distant future. It'll be pretty nearby. So that's what I'm hoping for.
Yeah, I always think about, I don't know, this might be like way too millennial old school to say for people, but I don't know. Do you remember Ask Jeeves?
Oh yes, I do. And he
Yeah,
had like
back in the day.
a waiter
Yeah, the
avatar.
little waiter. And I remember being younger trying to use Ask Jeeves to, work on something for school, for a report or
Yeah,
something. And even something like that, right? That wasn't necessarily the AI the way we think about it today, but having to tell it what I'm looking for and having
yeah.
it give me the same response each time, that was difficult back then.
Yes.
So,
Yeah,
yeah.
it's true. LLMs
Yeah.
are not great at that. It's true. Consistency is an issue for sure.
Right.
Sudipta, we are coming up on time, but I think I'm going to squeeze in one last question, if I may.
Yes,
What's
of course.
one piece of advice that you would give to organizations looking to start using AI for creating their lay summaries?
So I think similar to anything new, right? You have to make sure that your foundation is really strong. I think, as our guidelines suggest, right, keeping humans in the loop, that AI is really supplementation, it's not replacement. And so if the process that you're using for a PLS is not strong, the AI is not going to work. It's all going to fall apart from a process standpoint, from a consistency standpoint. And so I think it's very key, having some level of, a check that's done to make sure, like, hey, are we producing consistent PLSs in a way that we like, that are patient reviewed, that are standard in what we say to the public, and we have this down. And we can then add AI on. I think it gets tricky. I think it was a couple of years ago at maybe a DIA conference. Somebody came up to me. This was just in the past 2 years. Somebody came up to me and was from a smaller pharma company and basically had like a list of questions about lay summaries, and just, how do I handle this issue? How do I handle that? How do I write about this scenario? And I think we're just not all on the same level right now. And so having that, tie in with AI too, I think it just turns into a big mess that can honestly further make the public distrust what we're putting out there. They're already distrusting AI, right? We talked about this briefly earlier. I will admit, if I'm looking at something on social media, I now have this little lingering thought in my head of like, is this AI? Is this real? Is this AI? That, and I think that level of not knowing yet where we are is a problem if the process you're adding it to has its own problems. So I think it's, making the foundation strong before you consider really putting it. It's very buzzwordy now. It's very like, oh yeah, everyone's doing it. But if you don't have your process figured out and, have it be something that is seamless, it's going to be a far cry from what you're trying to use it for.
Wow, fantastic insights and fantastic advice. Thank you very much. Sudipta, I could talk to you about this stuff for hours, and actually, listeners, we generally do. Whenever we catch up together at conferences, we are talking about this stuff for hours.
Oh,
so
yes.
It's been an absolute joy to have you on TriloTalk today. Thank you so much for joining. You're obviously a huge expert in the field, so I hope that our listeners have learned a little bit more about AI and lay summaries, and I strongly encourage them to read the guidelines that you and the working group have put out, because they are really excellent and very, very sensible and pragmatic. So thank you for that work, and thank you for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for listening to TriloTalk today. If you have feedback you'd like to share, or if you have any ideas for future topics you'd like us to cover, particularly something you think the community should be talking about, we would love to hear it. We would like this to be an ongoing conversation with medical writers at large, and you can send us your comments on our Twitter feed or our LinkedIn page. Just a reminder, you can find all our episodes of TriloTalk podcast on Apple Podcasts, YouTube Podcasts, Spotify, and trilogywriting.com/TriloTalk. Have a great rest of your day.